We are joined today with Regina. We continue our series on childhood trauma. This is how things that happen to us when we're children, they not only impact our lives as children, we carry those scars and those bruises and those cycles into our adult life. Regina has an amazing story where I won't even hint. I will just let her start with her story, and I'm so excited to share it with you today.
Hello, Jillian. Thank you so much for having me on as a guest. Uh, my trauma started in childhood due to my parents' incapability of raising me. I suffered lots of trauma. Because my parents weren't able to raise me, I was living with my maternal grandmother. And she was my first memory of love and care, just, super sweet. And then when I was in first grade, she passed away from cancer, to which I was unaware of until near the end. And then the family came together and decided that it was time for my mom to take responsibility of me. So at the end of the school year, I went relocated out of state to live with my mom. And that was a really rough year because my mom was very unstable financially. We ended up losing our apartment and had to move in with one of her coworkers. And it was just a lot of chaos and challenges. And I suffered abuse in nearly every way in that home. And so by the end of that school year, my mom had lost custody of me. And so at that point, the case went to court, and my grandmother's sister stepped up to raise me. So I relocated out of state again to live with her, only to get there and discover that she was an alcoholic and physically, verbally abusive. And so I figured out, ways of just surviving that really bad situation. And at the age of 17, I grabbed a trash bag, packed a few things in it, and ran away to stay with my best friend for a while until I could figure out where it was that I was going to go. And after considering a couple options, I decided to relocate out of state again to live with my mom. And not much had changed. There were still lots of issues there. So at that point, I just did the best to make it work. I came into early adulthood terribly scarred and insecure, seeking validation, and just really lost. So in my mid-20s, I met someone after going through multiple failed relationships and more trauma. I met my ex-husband, and we dated for a short period of time before we got engaged. And then a couple years later, we got married, and that marriage was just a continuation of my childhood, more abuse verbally, financially, and emotionally for me. Because of the childhood trauma, it was difficult for me to even recognize that I had been, you know, and living in this abusive cycle. And it took me 23 years to get out of that marriage, a couple attempts, and just really, really lost a sense of self, love for life, and ended up on my kitchen floor, exhausted from having thrown the dishes from the dishwasher. I just hit a wall in that moment. And I knew at that point that I needed help. And I sought therapy, attempted to leave once, didn't work. I stayed, and we went to therapy. It was like one step forward, two steps backward. And after 4 years, I made the decision to seek therapy alone. And it was during that time that I really worked hard to get myself together in every way. And 5 years ago, I filed for divorce. And that was the beginning of this wonderful thing I call life.
So I want to jump in right there because I have there's so many parts of your story that just really resonated. And I just kind of wanted to unpack in case there's someone who is living in that moment right now and feels like that is the only moment that life is. So, and when you were a child and you left living with your mom and then you went back to living with her, was that something you were excited about? Like, okay, this is a new horizon for us. This is going to be great. Or were you kind of apprehensive about it?
I was apprehensive about it because I had gone through so much early on with her, but not having many options. I realized that I had to just make the best of what I considered to be the best option, though it was not going to be good.
Yeah, absolutely. And another part of your story that I've heard a lot when I've spoken to women who've had childhood trauma is just how quickly you settled on a life partner. What was kind of going through your mind and your heart in those moments that you thought, okay, this is the right this is the right partner for me. I'm ready to get married.
Right. I think for me, it felt safe. Narcissists have an incredible way of providing space initially with the love bombing and agreeing to everything, loving everything you love, wanting to do everything you want to do. They have an incredible way of making you feel comfortable and safe.
And that's what you
And
were looking for.
I
Yeah.
was looking for safety and love and peace and just a place where I could be myself. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but it sounds like a good thing. I can just be myself. And they have an amazing way of putting you on a pedestal and making you feel safe only to chip away at it one piece at a time.
It's an interesting cycle because that's what women who've been through childhood trauma, that's what you're seeking is that safe place, that cave. And that sets up perfectly for a narcissist. It's like we're the perfect bait for that hook. And that was one thing I really liked from our initial conversation. You talked about just different types of narcissists. Could you kind of just give us a little overview about that in case someone maybe feels like they're living with a narcissist but can't quite put their finger on it?
Okay. So I know I'm going to try to go off the top of my head here. There is the antagonistic narcissist. That's quite clear. They spend every waking moment antagonizing people. There is the covert narcissist in that they do things in such a covert way. They're passive aggressive, so it doesn't come off as some of the other types that are like grandiose. Grandiose is someone who's over the top, seeking attention, constantly thinking that they are better than others. They chase after fame and fortune and money. There is also,
I think that's enough. I mean, that's enough to kind of
yes.
open someone's mind because As we've gone through this series, we've unpacked. I thought love language was the only. Well, first, let me rewind back. I thought like Myers Briggs was the only kind of way to understand someone. And then as we've kind of gone through this, we've talked about love languages. And then we've kind of gone through attachment styles. And now to have your story really kind of highlight narcissism and how there's different types, how they can present differently. It's just been so good to be able to highlight these things that I think kind of get glossed over or just kind of put in buckets together and not really. You have to know the devil you're dealing with. And I think so often we don't deal with our devils because we can't properly identify them. And so I've loved this series because it has helped us kind of name those things. And so the other thing I kind of wanted to just go back to, because that really resonated in your story, was you said you tried to leave a couple times.
Yes.
What happened in those situations?
Because my abuse was financial, emotional, and verbal, it just stripped away my self-esteem and my ability to even think that financially I could survive on my own. And so that was the constant war in my head. You can't make it on your own because everything that you're told every day in every single way is that financially you won't survive, you weren't smart enough, you don't know this or you don't know that, you don't even know how to clean up a spill on the floor, and so a big part of it for me was my self-esteem, and then creating financially the freedom and comfort level of being on my own, which required me to go back to work. And that was a struggle because I kept it to myself until the week before I headed back to work. And when I told him that I was going back to work, I had to leave the house that night.
Because he saw that as a direct threat.
Yes.
I can see that, and I can see how I've spoken to a couple women who've had it. It's such a cycle. You can't leave because you need that employment, that financial independence, but
Right.
your narcissist, for lack of a better word, knows that that's your ticket out.
That's
So
their superpower.
absolutely. So I'm glad that you had. Now, what kind of resources? So let's say someone's at home and they're like, okay, step one, I'm going to get a job. I'm going to do. What would you kind of say would be a good place for them to start, resource wise? Because you mentioned kind of that you went to therapy. How
Right.
did that kind of play into your overall, or did you just get a notebook and sit down and say, step one, get a job? Like, what was it?
I ended up contacting a local women's center and going in to do an intake. And that was very hard for me given my financial position. Through my businesses, I had always donated to places like that. So imagine me, someone who lives in a large home and drives custom luxury vehicles, having to go to some neighborhood women's center and humble myself and do an intake form. It was such a challenge because I didn't see myself as a victim or that I belonged there with those people,
Hmm.
but I did it.
I'm so glad that you talk about that because we really need to normalize that it's okay to ask for help. It doesn't mean that we're dumb or broken, or which is kind of what I hear from so many women when they're in that situation.
Yes.
And you got in that situation when you were 5, like, you didn't get in that situation at 50 or 40, or, like, and so I think that's what I'm really trying to highlight is, it's not a reflection of you didn't go to, the not that, gambling can be great for some people, but it's not like you did something that actively put you in that situation.
Right.
You were kind of groomed almost in life to be in that situation. And so you
Mhm.
mentioned that you kind of finally got up the nerve to get divorced, and now you're living your best life. Like, what does that, first I want to know what it feels like, and then I want to know, how do you do that? How do you decide what you're going to do every day and that you know that you want to do that?
Oh gosh.
Choice, freedom. How do you handle choice and freedom?
I think once I filed for divorce, it was like opening a jail cell. It was like you're coming out and you now will have the ability to create the life that you want. As I was going through therapy, I began to journal a lot because so much of the time during my marriage, my emotions were shut down because of, just the abuse. All my emotions just went like dead, or just they were
Mm-hmm.
limited.
They were
And
exhausted. They were
yeah,
overwhelmed. Like, yeah.
right. So once I'd filed for divorce and started to make changes, my emotions came back online, and it was such a scary thing to suddenly have all of these feelings, good and bad. So I started journaling in an app on my phone that had its own passcode
Mm-hmm.
for my safety and security.
Yeah.
And I just began to write about what it was that I wanted and needed for this phase of my life. And it became the roadmap to how I got here. um, I let a friend of mine read my journal writings, and she said, "Oh my goodness, do you feel like you should write a book?" And I was like, at that time, no, but I do feel like I want to start a blog. And so it wasn't long after that that I went to work and created a divorce blog,
Mm-hmm.
Alimony of Life. And that became an outlet for me to share about the things that I was going through. Eventually, I added 3 writers. I'm up to 4 other writers now. So there are 5 of us writing about the various topics of divorce. And I started to travel. I started roller skating again. Um,
Like roller skating or like roller derby? Like, I can totally see you doing roller derby.
roller skating, roller skating. I did it as a child, and I did it again in my teens and then in my 20s. And so I had purchased some black skates, and they're in my garage. They're all dusty. But a few years ago, I picked it up again, got some baby blue suede skates, and I go as often as I can. It's exercise, and it's it's fun, and I get to leave the world behind. When I go in the rink, the music, and it's an awesome thing to pick up something that I've done, throughout my life. I was, working with the blog, and eventually added a private community to the blog that is secured so that people could come in and feel safe to talk about, whatever they were going through. Realizing that I wanted to grow that audience, I decided to start speaking, but that was going to be a challenge because no one knew I had a lifelong fear of public speaking.
I was just gonna say, was it because, like, did your friends know? Like, when you were going through your marriage and your divorce, were you one that kept up a facade and no one knew what was going on? Or did you share?
Only my closest friends, only my closest friends knew. what I was going through, and they were very supportive of me. And when I tried to open up to them about what was going on, they didn't believe me, because narcissists have an amazing way of creating a smokescreen. And when you try to step outside of that to talk to people and share with them about what you're going through, looking for support, they don't believe you. And I think that's one of the toughest things that I had to experience.
That is so true. They're so good at crafting the narrative
Yes.
and kind of and collecting the game pieces. If we were on a game board, they're very good at that. And I'm so glad that you segued to your blog and your community. So let's say that there's someone who is listening and it's like, yes, I need to connect with you more. Where can they find you online, and what kind of tools do you offer?
Okay, so Alimony of Life, which is a play on alimony, it's alimonyoflife.com. And people can come in there, they can read the blog posts, they can join the private community. There's a page with resources, and they can also find my memoir, Lessons on the Way to One-Some, there.
I love
So it's
that.
just, and then once you come into the private community, you have access to the blog post, informational videos that are helpful for the topics that we deal with, and there's songs and morning motivations. And so it's a wonderful space that I've created for people who are contemplating going through and challenged on the other side of divorce.
I'm so glad that you not only had the bravery to get yourself out, but now you're talking about it, you're normalizing it, taking away a lot of stigma and shame. I think in any failed marriage, everyone blames themselves, whether they were or not. And I can see, like, why didn't I try hard enough? Why couldn't I fix this person? Why couldn't I? So I'm so glad that you talked about it, and then that you've kind of created a well of water for those that are there, that don't have the support from their friends. Because I have learned just from these conversations, more often than not, people, if they've not been through this, truly don't understand how to comfort or be a good friend. And I don't think it's intentional, or I just don't think people have the training, or the emotional training. So I'm just so glad that you've created these resources and that you've come on today to share this, because it happens more than we talk about. And I know there's someone who's going to hear your story, and it's going to be a light for them to get out of where they are.
That's my hope. That's my hope. Everything I do now in terms of my service, advocacy, is to give people hope and let them know that there is a way. There's a way out, and there are people and resources available to you to help you. I also sit on the executive board for a domestic violence organization, Confronting Domestic Violence, and we offer resources there. I'm head of community relations, so I don't deal with victims directly. I'm usually working within the community, creating partnerships and donations and things of that nature. I also will make centerpieces for our events and come up with names for
Love it.
our events and themes and all that kind of stuff. I'm kind of all over the place, but it's a labor of love for me.
So, how would someone find that they feel like they're in a domestic violence situation and they want a safe place to reach out? Where would they look for that?
ConfrontingDV.org.
Perfect. And we will add all of these in the show notes so that folks can find help in a safe way and in a private and respectful way that maintains their dignity. That is another kind of thing I've noticed in these conversations, that's kind of one of the first casualties. And so I'm so glad that there's resources that are accessible, kind of no matter where someone is or what their financial situation is. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and sharing these resources. And I look forward to like 5 years from now hearing like what the next part of like first it's roller skating, next you're going to be like Amelia Earhart or something. Like I can't wait to see like what you decide to do next.
Oh, thank you so much.